teenage friends from an affluent suburb of Manchester. But beneath the surface of their friendship lay a bizarre internet plot to commit murder.
This was all about unrequited love. It was a sort of adolescent gay Romeo and Juliet story. As he was stabbing John, he held him and told him that he loved him.
An intricate web of deceit, intrigue and betrayal, where the only escape is for one of the boys to murder his best friend.
It was a story which had everything. It had sex, politics, bloodlust, money.
It was one of the most bewildering cases in British legal history. The 14-year-old fantasist who manipulated his best friend to carry out a near-fatal stabbing. That's our story, tonight, on Making of a Monster. As a forensic psychologist, I've spent over 10 years analysing the behaviour of murderers, rapists and paedophiles. I've worked in prisons and special hospitals, trying to understand what makes somebody capable of a truly monstrous act of violence. But tonight's story stands alone. It's the only British case I'm aware of where the victim, and let's call him John, plotted his own murder.
To try to unravel the psychological profiles of dangerous convicts, Kerry has spent a decade researching and interviewing the most violent killers and criminals in Britain. In tonight's programme, she examines the case of the victim who plotted his own murder.
This is a frankly bizarre tale of two boys who were caught up in an internet fantasy. So, what do we know about them? Here to discuss it, our fellow forensic psychologist Dr. David Holmes and Andrew Greenslade, a special branch detective and one of the country's leading crime analysts. But first, let's find out more about the crime. Altrincham, a quiet suburb of Manchester, an unlikely setting for a story of a near-fatal internet attraction. A judge has ordered that the real identities of the two boys at the centre of this case can never be revealed. They're simply known as John and Mark. All of the following sequences have been reconstructed using two actors. Just before 8 p.m, on Sunday, 29th of June, 2003, the police took a call from a 16-year-old boy, Mark. His best friend John had been stabbed in Goose Green, a quiet alleyway just off the main street in Altrincham. The emergency services were quickly on the scene and found John clutching his stomach.
When the police first arrived on the scene, they found a dying boy and a very frightened boy who just witnessed his friends being attacked.
John was rushed to hospital, critically ill with stab wounds to his chest and stomach. One of the wounds was so deep, it pierced his kidney and liver. At first it seemed as if a brutal but nevertheless straightforward mugging had gone terribly wrong. Mark was keen to help detectives and gave them a description of a 5'10" male, late teens to early 20s, wearing jeans and a hooded top.
First blush, all we knew was a teenage boy had been attacked while he was out with his friend. Everyone in Altrincham was worried. It was really a case of, look at your children, people were scared.
But when officers examined CCTV footage, they realised that the story was implausible. It showed John and Mark had disappeared down the alleyway, alone. When Mark was confronted with the footage, he admitted stabbing his friend.
Mark, in interview, explained in great detail why he had done it, effectively saying that he had been ordered to do it by the British Secret Service.
Mark's explanation left the police incredulous. Under questioning, he revealed that he had been recruited over the internet by a spy mistress called Janet Dobinson. Janet Dobinson wrote only in capitals. It seemed an incredible story, but when police checked Mark's computer, they found emails and messages that proved his account to be true. He had been receiving messages from someone calling herself Janet.
Janet Dobinson was a strong but very sexy lady who wielded a lot of power, but at the same time had a lot to offer him and was offering him all sorts of favours, financial and sexual.
Janet, the spy mistress, was described as quite a glamorous and sexy dominatrix type woman who she lured him into this world. She offered him money, sex, and perhaps all the things a teenage boy would easily have his head turned towards.
Via the chat room, Mark received orders from Janet. He was to keep a close eye on his friend John and report his every move. On Saturday, 28th of June, the day before the stabbing, Mark received his final orders from Janet. He was to kill his best friend. His reward, sex with Janet and millions of pounds in cash. Mark took John to a nearby shopping centre and bought a kitchen knife, just as Janet had ordered. But at this point, he couldn't bring himself to stab John. The two boys made their way back to Altrincham, and as they walked through a quiet alleyway, Mark saw his opportunity to strike. He took out the 6-inch kitchen knife and plunged it deep into John's stomach and chest.
David, the fact that he was actually prepared to go to the lengths that he did go to, does that not say that there's something unusual about this boy?
Stabbing someone is quite a brutal act. It is not an easy act. You have to push quite hard on a knife for it to go into someone in the first place, and that actually would involve a certain level of inability to feel the sense of revulsion that most of us would feel. We're assuming that this boy has no experience of stabbing people and killing things. Therefore, how could he, one, stab this person who he supposedly liked? These young men and women are doing this all the time. You say they haven't stabbed anybody. They're stabbing people all the time. They're machine gunning each other. They're hacking pieces of each other's bodies off. In these internet games and games on whatever console they choose to use, this is a common form.
Actually, they're pressing a button, aren't they?
In the case of internet games, yes, they're very conversant with the killing machinery, but in fact, to physically feel the metal against and pushing against somebody's skin requires a certain level of lack of empathy. And in this case, we have someone who not only actually plunged a knife into someone, but took it out and plunged it in twice. So they did not say, oh, I didn't really like doing that, that was not nice. They carried on. And don't forget, if we're to believe that he believed the whole scenario, he was killing an innocent person, and he did not know that that was the person who'd ordered him to carry out the act. So this, if we believe that he was innocent in his thinking, then he actually did commit murder, homicide, decide yourself.
Well, there are a number of different arguments there, and I suggest to you there is even perhaps a crossover in terms of assisted suicide, where somebody can kill somebody that they love if the appropriate impetuses are there.
Absolutely.
If the emotions are there.
Andrew, do you believe then that any child or any person can be persuaded to kill somebody else?
I think that's the case. I mean, we have 2 world wars behind us, where for king and country and for good cause people have committed what would otherwise be murder throughout history. But at the end of the day, if you are given sufficient impetus or command or whatever it is that final turning point, perhaps in the belief that you are going to allow a loved one to survive, I believe anybody will do anything if the right buttons are pressed.
So I think anyone could be persuaded to end up possibly down the alley with a knife in their hand, with the intent of, I'm supposed to do this, I think I'm going to do this. But I don't think that anyone would actually be able to plunge a knife in, and certainly not twice. And I think, to go back to what Andrew said, during the wars, there were scores of soldiers who could not, when it actually came to it, push the bayonet into someone else, and who actually turned and ran or turned and would not do it. Because some of us have this kind of brain area which says, I would feel revulsion if I did this. And you have to be kind of specifically trained to get around that. And I don't think an individual, particularly a boy in this position, could necessarily be pre-trained to do that.
My straightforward point is that if you were given the right impetus, whatever that may be, quite often related to your family, you will do things that you didn't think you were capable of doing.
I think you're right. I mean, if you were defending your family, and the law will probably back you on that, but to actually strike a stranger that you have no particular grievance against, I think that takes a particular pathology.
Well, I think that we've talked a lot about Mark, but I think we need to learn about the other personality in this case. Coming up next, we'll learn more about the background of the 2 boys involved. Let's see if there's anything there that could possibly explain how they came to be in the predicament that they were in. On a quiet Sunday evening in June 2003, 16-year-old Mark led his best friend, 14-year-old John, into a secluded alleyway in Altrincham. There he stabbed him repeatedly with a 6-inch kitchen knife, leaving him close to death. Mark claimed to love John, so what could have gone on in their lives that led to this fateful moment? Mark was a college student who worked part-time in a local restaurant.
Mark was just an ordinary, unspectacular boy from a very close family, very close to his father. He and his father used to go and watch football. He was a keen footballer, not terribly academic, but perfectly ordinary.
In his spare time, he liked to log on to internet chat rooms, where he could post pictures, make friends, talk about football, clothes and music.
John, who was a very intelligent boy doing extremely well at school, wanted to be either an airline pilot or a barrister. His mother had a good job as manageress of a local estate agency. He had a rather problematic paternal background because his natural father had left his mother when he was very young, and there had then been a few partners, not all of them suitable, and eventually the latest partner was a very nice man, a plumber.
Like Mark, John spent hours chatting on the internet. Before too long, they decided to meet. And once they'd met, their friendship became especially important to them both.
I think both of them had experienced problems at home, problems making friends, so I think they'd never had such an intense relationship, such a special relationship.
Both boys were becoming obsessed. They were coming home from school and logging on immediately, spending hours in chat rooms.
The amount of time that Mark spent on his computer was unbelievable. He'd be on his computer all night sometimes.
John retreated into a virtual world of the net and lived a fantasy existence.
Well, you have to remember these were boys of 14 and 16 respectively, and these days the kids are brought up on a diet of science fiction and far-fetched films, and indeed much of the inspiration, John was later to tell me, for his stories came from films.
Once the police realised that the stabbing had been carried out by Mark, they decided to examine both boys' computers. What emerged from the boys' computers was an internet soap opera, moving from one scene to the next, with each character and plotline more fantastic than the last. The police were stunned. John had created a range of characters, including the fictional spy mistress Janet Dobinson. Each character was more improbable than the next, and they were all designed with the sole purpose of manipulating Mark to do what John wanted, and that was for Mark to kill him. The older boy thought he was talking to 5 or 6 different people, when in fact he was talking to the younger boy all along. The police found 56,000 lines of text between them.
I was told by the police that the total of computer output which they had to print out and examine was 46 feet high.
I think of the two boys, John definitely had the upper hand. He pulled the strings of the relationship from the outset. And Mark did whatever he wanted, whether it was for him or for one of the characters he created. He'd totally fallen for it.
It seems bizarre that he was taken in by it, but there's absolutely no doubt that he was. So the only conclusion that can be drawn from that is that he was very naive and perhaps vulnerable to fantasy.
6 months before 16-year-old Mark stabbed John, he had become an obsessive user of an internet chat room, a passion very much shared with his friend. David, we haven't talked about John very much yet. He's been described as a puppet master. But was this really a sophisticated attempt at brainwashing Mark?
I don't think it was particularly brainwashing. I think perhaps he got very much caught up in the creation of a series of characters that he actually developed bit by bit into various scenarios. And I think that rather than this being a plot from the beginning, that he determined that he was going to do this, it evolved bit by bit. And I think part of the very convincing aspect, and let's face it, John was very convincing.
Well, was he really that convincing? Let's face
I
it.
think in terms of the creation of several characters simultaneously and maintaining each of their individual parts to the same person is quite a difficult feat to achieve. Excuse me, but I think you're taking this to a very sophisticated level and you're looking at it from your own perspective, which is highly articulate and highly academic. I would believe that this young man would be very easily subverted. You say it's not realistic. I suspect that it might have been extremely realistic. It's a very fine line. And you're talking about criminal intent here. You're talking about what's in the guy's mind. And you've just been saying that he's nurturing these characters, and if he truly believes that what he's doing is right, or that he has a reasonable excuse or a lawful authority to do it, in that case, how can he be convicted of a crime?
David, is there anything at all in these boys' backgrounds that could have led us to predict what would happen? Because they seem quite unremarkable to me.
They are quite unremarkable children, but in the case of John, who if you like is the perpetrator, there is an absence in his background of kind of parental attention. He was generally left to his own devices a lot of the time, and I presume a lot of that time he spent on the internet. And I think he learned a lot of basic skills and some of the kind of interactions, and possibly a real gem would learn that you can impersonate and that people do impersonate others on the internet quite regularly, quite routinely, and maybe that is how this built into something which was unusual, which you wouldn't normally find, of pushing the boundaries of impersonation.
I think you're talking about the great majority of young people these days. They're all left in their bedrooms to their own devices. The one-parent family thing, they all have to go out and earn a living. It's difficult in this day and age, is it not, to give your child the sort of support, mental, physical, financial support for us all. Therefore, I think they're left in the room, they get on the computer, and as you said, David, they learn the life skills there. But unfortunately, those life skills that they're learning is that life is cheap. And I think that has a very important point to be made here. If that's what he sees as reality, how can he have formed a criminal intent? He thought that was normal.
What could his possible motives have been, David?
Well, they were searching, were scraping as psychologists to try and find some kind of motivation. I mean, it's posited that he was, as it were, fairly depressed and alienated due possibly to his sexuality indeterminate, and perhaps tried to find his way, and perhaps had this kind of plot that maybe he wanted to draw attention to himself, if not to actually kill himself. But possibly was developing some kind of paraphilic need to control others, see if he could control others, and perhaps act out some bizarre scenario.
Well, this case doesn't just have sexual undertones, it's got glaring sexual overtones, even though it wasn't a sexual offence. Now, how much can we actually believe that Mark was convinced by this cyber fantasy world?
If this young man thought that what he was doing was real, convinced the other young man that it was as real, we can't enter that world ourselves and try and put our values on. It's like self-harm. They will cut themselves quite badly. And I wonder if there's an analogy here where he maybe was too afraid to kill himself, but yes, for whatever reason, wanted to. Therefore, he had to find another device, another weapon. And he used the current trend of fantasy within the internet to create that weapon, which was the other boy, so that he could fulfill what he wanted to do. And I believe that was to commit suicide.
We'll never know where John's concerned, and I'm not too convinced, actually, that this wasn't John being very much excited by the possibility that he could control somebody. But where Mark is concerned, there was a huge build-up. There was months and months of various different characters, as you've said, coming online. And one of those characters was Rachel. And Rachel and Mark engaged in an internet relationship. So obviously this was meeting Mark's needs for, lots of sexual chat, lots of titillation. Now, apparently, Mark was led to believe that Rachel had been murdered, but he didn't show the normal response to that. If you think that your girlfriend's been murdered, you'd be distressed. He didn't call the police, he just carried on as normal. So that strikes me as somebody who knows that they're engaged in fantasy, but they're playing along.
I think perhaps there's two elements here. One is, clearly he was involved in what he would describe as gameplay, a transposition of a computer game into a kind of apparently real-world scenario. But on the other hand, you've got to remember that he has gone so far into this fantasy. He has already committed himself to some idea of believing what has been presented to him. And we have a kind of principle of cognitive dissonance. In other words, you cannot kind of hold two opposing sort of thoughts in your mind at the same time.
Way, shape or form.
So if he's already committed, I'm already believing this, I'm already saying yes to this, then it becomes very difficult for him to backtrack. But I don't know that he actually truly believed. He was in the game. He knew he was in the game, but I think he was beginning to think it was a game. But the one thing that game paid off was attention to Mark. Mark becoming a character in something in the world which gave him some kind of status and prestige. And I think perhaps that was the role enactment. The fact when it came to actually plunging a knife into someone, it may have got a little bit disengaged, but up to that point, he was playing the hero in a film of his own making.
Well, I think that it was obviously meeting the needs of both boys, strange as those needs might be to the layperson, to the outside observer. I don't think it's just adolescents that get involved in this kind of fantasy or role play, and I don't think it's just adolescents who can be, if you like, brainwashed. After the break, we'll take a look at some other high-profile cases involving internet fantasists. Tonight we're examining the case of John and Mark, two schoolboys caught up in an internet fantasy. which would end in the younger boy persuading his friend to stab him with a kitchen knife. Incitement to commit murder, your own murder, is unique in British forensic history, but there have been some other high-profile cases involving intrigue, deception and betrayal. Perhaps one of the most shocking was that of Robert Hendy Freegard. The former barman and car salesman worked at a pub in Newport, Shropshire. Over a period of 10 years, the conman kept several people under his spell, obtaining over £500,000 from them and getting them to carry out a quite extraordinary series of loyalty tests. He persuaded them that they were part of his counter-terrorist plans and that their lives were in danger.
He was quite horrible to one woman in particular. He had her believe that there was a sniper who had a gun trained on her flat, and so she was told that she couldn't go to her flat in the daytime. And if she went back to her flat in night time, then she couldn't put the lights on, and she would have to crawl around the floor of her flat.
He said he needed money to fund his operations, and unfortunately for his victims, it all came out of their bank accounts. Often his victims were well-educated people from supportive families. Hendy Freegard had left school at 14 with no qualifications and had hardly worked a day in his life. So how was it that he was able to manipulate his friends so comprehensively?
Most of the victims are female. Most of them were educated. In fact, they were all quite highly educated. One of them had a PhD, another one was a lawyer.
He stripped the victims of their usual support group, families and friends. In an attempt to belittle them, they were isolated and became dependent on him.
His motivation was never very clear to me. There obviously was the money, which enabled him to live a lifestyle he wanted to lead. He stayed in hotels, he bought expensive clothes, he bought expensive watches. But I'm not convinced that was really what it was down to. It was much more, in my view, about the power that he had over them. He was almost like a cult figure who people followed for years and years and years.
It took a joint sting operation by Scotland Yard and the American FBI to trap him. He was enticed to Heathrow Airport, where he believed he was picking up $10,000 from one of his victims' parents. It was there that he was arrested, and his vicious campaign of conning ended. In 2005, the 34-year-old was found guilty of 2 counts of kidnap, 10 of theft, and 8 of deception, and was given a life sentence.
He's never shown any remorse at all. He's always portrayed himself as the victim in this, rather than the person who's the perpetrator.
Hendy Freegard appealed against the kidnapping convictions and won. His life sentence was revoked, and he is due to be released soon. Hendy Freegard was successful because his victims were willing to collude in his fantasies. In our next case, the 2 main protagonists created their own fantasy world, which was to spiral out of control and take on a terrible and deadly reality all of its very own. Every morning of every weekday for 12 years, Thomas Montgomery clocked on at the local tool factory in Clarence, a small town in upstate New York. After work, he walked the family dog. He was a good dad to his teenage children and his wife of 16 years. For the most part, his life was uneventful. Which may explain why 47-year-old Montgomery, with his aging body and receding hair, decided to become someone else. He created an alter ego on the internet called Tommy, an 18-year-old Marine just back from Iraq. In his fantasy world, Tommy was good-looking, muscular and tough, and he was ready to be launched into the limitless possibilities of cyberspace.
We all have certain aspects of ourselves which are underdeveloped, and virtuality gives us the opportunity to try those identities on for size.
In the spring of 2005, Tommy began an internet relationship with a teenage girl called Jessie, living in West Virginia. She appeared to be beautiful, smart and young. It wasn't long before an internet friendship turned into an internet infatuation. They spent hours online with each other.
It can become very heady and very exciting when you realise that you can be anybody. And also, you get a real sense of connection with the other people that you're talking to inside the chat room.
But their relationship was about to turn sour. During the course of their chats, Thomas told Jessie about a friend at work called Brian. Intrigued, Jessie tracked Brian down and introduced herself. Gradually, Brian and Thomas became rivals for the affections of the young woman. Thomas became increasingly jealous. It seemed as if his alter ego Tommy no longer impressed the young and beautiful Jessie. In the late summer of 2006, Brian got off work and was sitting in his car in the plant parking lot when someone drove by and pumped his body full of lead using a .30 caliber gun. They arrested Thomas Montgomery and charged him with murdering Brian. But as they got him in jail, they told him the rest of the story. The teenager in West Virginia was no teen. She was in her mid-40s and the mother of the young woman whose photograph she posted on the website. She too was a fraud.
Cyberspace is a consensual hallucination. It's an imaginary place where we all enter a sense of reality within virtuality, where things do seem to make sense, as they do in dreams.
Tommy and Jessie were the alter egos of two middle-aged people desperate to escape their lives. That in itself is probably not extraordinary. What is extraordinary is that it led to a brutal killing. How much do you think this goes on across the country, that people meet on the internet and just create whole new worlds for themselves?
I think it's unfortunately incredibly common. It's common practice, and to some degree, although people look down on it, it's kind of encouraged in some areas. I mean, the kind of Facebook idea where people, can possibly...
Yeah, well, Facebook it's about being yourself to an extent, isn't it? You put a photograph of yourself on and you talk about your life. You don't create a whole new identity.
Theoretically, but clearly, as people improve themselves and perhaps put the photograph of somebody who's slightly better, you suddenly find that you get more attention, etc. And people manipulate this and realise this. Now, that itself is not particularly a crime. Where the problem is the reciprocation. When people start to get to know each other, do you maintain that fantasy, or do you want to kind of let slip the reality so that you actually do engage with that person at a real level? Because do you want to know someone, or don't you want to know someone? The problem is that reciprocation itself is part of a process of bonding, and it is very important to understand that that bonding can be very powerful indeed, and all it requires is the toing and froing on a regular basis between two people, and a relationship starts. If that relationship is maintained, as in this particular case, at a fantasy level, then that fantasy has to continue under all circumstances in order for the relationship to continue.
But I think it starts for me as a protection mechanism, and rightly so, because you don't know who or what sort of person you're going to meet. And I think therefore people are hiding behind the internet as a safety mechanism. That's just my theory.
It kind of provides some armour, doesn't it, against someone else who may be pretending as well. So why should you drop your guard, as you're trying to indicate there, and remove your fantasy and expose yourself as the real person when they may not, or in fact, may in fact be the person that they're
Should we not expect then that people that we may meet over the internet are not going to be who they say they are?
What has the internet got to do with this? I suggest to you men, especially men, but men and women who meet each other in pubs and clubs, don't tell the truth about themselves. It starts with age, it starts with occupation. I'm an airline pilot. Is a fairly common. We blitz and glitz up our lives to make ourselves more appropriate to what we perceive as a partner, male or female. There's nothing new here. The internet is just another way of doing it.
It's just a medium for it. I think the Montgomery case has got the most in common with the case of Mark and John. But the case of Freegard is something quite different, isn't it, David? This is a classic case of brainwashing, is it not?
Well, it's a case of conmanship. This is someone who almost as a way of life will lie, will fantasise, will create scenarios and carefully keep them going. This is someone who, as a means of actually interacting with others and of gaining, because there is a clear profit motive here, will actually lie and intimidate during those lies. It's kind of forming a cult, if you like. It's the idea of isolating individuals, cutting them off from their friends and contacts and family, and then influencing them with fantasies which to some degree are fearful, which push them along a path. And I think that's where Freegard really does differ from the others.
Well, I think that the Freegard case, you can understand actually how his victims went down that fantasy route with him, can't you? They were isolated from their friends and their family, as you say. He created a whole world, but actually, in the world, this didn't take place over the internet. It's harder to try and understand how Mark was taken in.
I see no difference, to be honest with you. I see no difference.
Process. He wasn't isolated from his peers, his friends, other than the isolation which was his own.
That's precisely what his character type was. There are elements of that in his upbringing, and that's what he conceived as an environment to culture, what David has called this cult theory. He had absolute control over them and didn't have to lift a stick of violence towards them. But the control was there anyway, just the same.
I think the concept that I mentioned earlier about cognitive dissonance applies far more firmly to Freegard than it did to Mark.
Mark could, if you like, have dropped out without losing a massive amount of face.
At any point he could have dropped out.
He could have dropped out, but in the case of Freegard, it seemed far more real. These people had, as it were, prostrated themselves, literally, been beaten up, given money, endured ridiculous sort of tortures, and therefore to back off from that, saying, no, I was an idiot. I shouldn't have done that. That was all wrong. This is a complete creation. It's far more difficult because your foot is already very heavily in the door there. It's far more difficult to pull out.
Well, Freegard...
All full of truth in that. I tried to interject on you there. The victims of Freegard were all intelligent, collegiate, clever people from good family backgrounds. I think that's what you were saying, David, in terms of the fact that you've gone down this path and you immerse yourself in that world. That becomes your reality. Why should I believe any differently now? He's got your hook.
I think that the world that Freegard weaved was much more tangible than a case of Mark and John. What do you think was motivating him? We know that he made an awful lot of money out of his victims, but it was clearly driven by needs other than just finances, wasn't it?
Very much a control freak. He was very much someone who wanted to see other people under his control. He had sexual motives. It was his way of maintaining a presence, as it were, in the world, and a sense of power he had progressively over these individuals, probably bemused him even. I suggest to you that at the end of the day, like many crimes, whether they be allegedly politically motivated or otherwise, many crimes come simply down to the profit margin. He found he was very good at doing something, car salesman, he was good at selling cars, he was good at, therefore, encouraging young women, and of course young men, to part with their money. He was good at that.
I would say to you that it was more than just a financial need. That was meeting some serious emotional needs on his part, the need to control people, the need to have power over people.
Okay, but also meeting their needs as well, to be immersed in this much more interesting and inviting world of the spy.
Well, it is an intriguing area. After the break, we'll take a look at the repercussions of John and Mark's actions. 14-year-old John, the victim of a near-fatal stabbing, had duped his friend, 16-year-old Mark, into attacking him. Mark thought that he was acting on the orders of the British Secret Service. Of course, he was acting on a trail that had been set out by his friend. But how responsible were the boys for their actions?
I don't think John actually did appreciate the seriousness of the situation that he was himself creating. Or if he did, he didn't care. John, in fact, was playing with Mark's life to a very serious extent. And John was intelligent. He must have appreciated what he was likely to cause.
Almost a year after the stabbing, the case came to court. Mark admitted attempted murder, and John to incitement to murder. In court, Mark was quiet, composed, listening to the case. The boys had no eye contact between each other. I think at the end he realised he'd been very stupid and got himself involved in something he should never have gone near. John was composed, he sat quietly. I think perhaps then the full horror of what he'd done dawned on him.
There's no question in my mind that my client was a very frightened young man. He was quivering and tearful.
The court were told that John had actually fallen in love with Mark, that he felt an emotional intimacy for the older boy, and that this was the key to their relationship and its bizarre outcome.
John fell in love with Mark. He was at that stage as an adolescent where he thought he was gay. This was all about unrequited love. It was a sort of adolescent gay Romeo and Juliet story, in the sense that John came to realise that Mark was not gay and did not reciprocate his feelings sexually. So that's when John decided that he was tired of life, and he invented this elaborate plot in order for Mark to kill him. And indeed it's very significant, in my opinion, that the words that Mark is instructed to use, purportedly by Janet Dobinson, when he commits this murder, he is to say at the moment of plunging in the knife, "I love you, bro." I don't think that John's alleged emotional attraction or emotional involvement towards Mark was the key to this. I think the key to this was John seeing how much power he could hold over another person.
Mark spent 8 months in prison on remand before being sentenced to a 2-year supervision order.
He was banned from using the internet unsupervised and not allowed into chat rooms.
The judge recognised that this was just an extraordinary aberration of adolescence in both cases, and he said as much when sentencing them. And I particularly remember his words. He said, "I find this case staggering. Even a skilled writer of fiction would have been unable to create the plot of what I have heard in this court as real life."
John received a 3-year supervision order and was banned from any contact with Mark. He was told he must only access the internet under adult supervision and must not enter chat rooms.
It was a truly amazing story. It was one of the rare cases in court where, as a journalist, you're writing and you want to put your pen down and just listen. It is so bizarre. I suppose it was a story which had everything. It had sex, politics, bloodlust, money. It could have been a Hollywood script, but it was from the imagination of a 14-year-old boy.
As the judge said, skilled writers of fiction couldn't have come up with this plot. The judge also decided not to give either boy a custodial sentence. Do you think that was right in this case, David?
I think possibly in this case, maybe this was wrong, because I think this sets a precedent. And because this case is unusual, this intriguing tale that's been woven, and the unique nature of kind of suicide by proxy is going to draw attention to it, and attention to something where people have just been kind of cuffed or just given, orders, rather than a custodial sentence when clearly at least one person has actually attempted homicide. This sends out the wrong message, and it may send out a terrible message.
I disagree, because you're talking about the definition of homicide, and the boys didn't commit homicide. The judge could see that. That was reflected in the sentence.
Yes, but it's a very serious assault, and actually, if you think about it, was John not also guilty of actually a very serious assault?
Agree.
If he persuaded his friend?
Not homicide. And at the end of the day, we're back to these issues of criminal intent. In our world, we call actus reus and mens rea. It's not just the guilty act, it's the guilty mind. And the young men were at that stage in their lives where they could not, I believe, in those circumstances, with the fantasy world that was created around them, to have made the appropriate or sufficient criminal intent to prove that homicide was the intention.
He plunged a knife into someone. That is not just simply assault. His intent was to kill this person.
You can't say that. You're putting yourself in his mind. And here we are, we have this wonderful English legal structure. They were tried and they were found guilty, but the sentencing was appropriate to the level of their culpability. I would rather see, in those circumstances, the boys go free having learned a lesson in life, rather than having the rest of their lives destroyed by an act of fantasy stupidity.
I think the problem here Kerry's trying to draw attention to isn't so much the justice for the boys themselves, but the fact that this case will be seen by many people who may go down the same path, who may actually, it may go that bit further, or it may be less fortunate in that one of them dies, and it may set the precedent, oh, well, you will only get some kind of, observation order, you won't actually get a sentence, it's not a real world, we can play with this. I think we're blurring the distinction between fantasy and reality to a dangerous extent, not so much in looking at what would be appropriate for these two boys, but in setting a precedent for many, many other people watching this case.
Do you think that maybe it was a case of, well, this is a really bizarre, unprecedented case. We don't understand this, so therefore it's easy for us to say, well, it must be down to adolescence. It's an aberration of their age, and just simply put it to one side.
We talked earlier on about intelligent people being taken down the garden path in certain circumstances. What you are now saying is that the judge and or jury were incapable of drawing reasonable conclusions from the evidence that they've been presented with. I suggest to you that is rubbish. They made a good decision based on the evidence that they have. We can't just blanket convict everybody.
If we transpose that kind of, it's a very unusual case and let's give them the benefit because it's a learning experience. If we transpose that to the Montgomery case, we're talking here about what happens in fantasy, expectation, and a lack of reality testing in that someone here actually killed someone else because of a belief in a world that was entirely fictional. The reciprocation between Montgomery and Mary, in fact, created something which for them was so real, and for him was so real, he was prepared to kill for it. Now, in this case...
We keep getting this blurred distinction between fantasy and reality, and truly believing. If they truly believe, the law has a very difficult task on its hands now to prove otherwise, i.e. levels of criminality. This blurring of distinctions between fantasy and reality. You've called it fantasy, it was their reality.
Well, it wasn't reality for John.
It was
Calculated on John's part. He knew what he was doing. And essentially, we've just fed into this world, as you've said, where there are no consequences, where reality isn't really reality. Because there haven't been any...
It is their reality, though.
There haven't been any significant consequences in the real world for these boys. And that, to me, doesn't seem... Well, how do you think that will have affected Mark?
Well, Mark will have realised that he could have killed this person. I mean, it's clear to us, but over the years, he will have come to terms with the idea that, well, I could have committed murder. In fact, I almost tried to. Therefore, will I do it again? And has to come to terms in the same way as someone who has been caught up in some emotional crisis and has actually accidentally, hurt somebody severely, again has to come to terms with people with accidents, in a road accident, who have caused injury to others, go through traumas. He is going to go through a certain amount of trauma for actually causing the damage that he did cause.
Isn't that almost an assault then on John's part?
Well, it is. And crimes of passion or whatever the other emotional motivation there may be, you say nothing's happened to these boys. It's taken months to get to court and they've stood before a Crown Court trial. I suggest to you, if that isn't the biggest learning event of their entire lives, I would be most surprised.
David, what can we learn from these cases?
Well, these are groundbreaking cases. They're fairly unique, as it were. But what we can learn from these is the degree, particularly in the Montgomery case, the degree to which an unreal situation, a created situation, a fantasy situation, which is full of jealousies, anxieties, and fears and control that are not actually based in the real world, can lead to serious crimes, and in this case, murder.
Andrew, I imagine that there might be some parents actually watching this tonight, and of course their children are going to be upstairs on their computers. So are there any lessons for parents, particularly when we think about John and Mark's case?
Absolutely, and I believe that this is one case, yes, and they must all stand alone uniquely, but it isn't the last. And I think, therefore, we all have a responsibility to get up to those bedrooms, throw open the door, and release them, in many respects, from the clutches of the internet in its inappropriate way, and also for us to police the internet better. We have to be so careful and get back into the world of proper parenting.
Thanks, Sue. In over a decade of working with criminals, I've never encountered a case quite so exceptional. If there are lessons to be learnt, then they're undoubtedly for parents. Check what your children are up to and keep their feet firmly on the ground.